Asha Varma had been a woman of unshakable belief. Raised in a conservative Hindu family in the heart of Madhya Pradesh, she had never missed a morning prayer. Her day began before sunrise, lighting incense, ringing the small temple bell in their home, offering flowers to her gods, and chanting mantras she had learned at her grandmother's feet. Faith was everything. It gave her order, strength, identity. Her neighbors knew her for her unrelenting devotion. Every festival, every fast, every ritual was carried out with precision. And when it came to other faiths, Asha held nothing back. She didn't just disapprove, she despised them, especially Christians. To her, they were a threat. Their songs, their messages, their smiling invitations to churches. They all felt like an invasion. She had once chased away a group of women singing hymns outside her gate, throwing a bucket of water on them. She had torn a small gospel tract handed to her son at school, warning him never to speak to those people again. Her faith didn't just tell her who she was, it defined who she was not. And she was not one of them. But now, nothing in her belief could explain what was happening. 3 months ago, her 9-year-old son, Ariv, began complaining of stomach pain. At first, it seemed like a minor infection. But the pain grew. Then came the fever. Then weakness. The local doctor was confused. Blood tests showed nothing unusual. Medications did nothing. Day by day, Ariv faded. His laughter disappeared. His energy drained. More doctors. More confusion. They traveled to bigger cities. Specialists. CT scans. MRI. All inconclusive. Each visit left her with more questions and fewer options. She began turning to what she trusted most. Religion. She increased her fasting. She slept on the floor. She donated heavily to the local temple. She called in priests from far-off villages. Rituals were performed. Sacred threads were tied. Cow milk was poured over idols. She even walked barefoot for miles to a holy site she had never visited before. Still, Ariv grew worse. Her husband, Rakesh, was beginning to break under the weight of it all. They had spent nearly every rupee of their savings. He had taken time off work, and whispers of him losing his job were starting to spread. One night, when Ariv had slipped into unconsciousness for the first time, Rakesh snapped. He screamed at Asha in the hospital hallway, blaming her obsession with rituals. "Nothing you've done has worked," he shouted, his voice echoing down the corridor. Her in-laws began making phone calls about other options. Someone even suggested taking Ariv to a church healing meeting. Asha had shut that down with such force. The house fell silent for days. To her, that was betrayal, an insult to everything she had lived for. But here she was, 3 in the morning, hospital room 207. The doctors had told her hours earlier that there was nothing more they could do. And she knew, if her son died, her marriage wouldn't survive. Her in-laws would hold her responsible. Her community would say she must have sinned. Her God, it seemed, had turned his face. That was when she did something no one in her world could have imagined. She stood up, walked into the dimly lit hallway of the hospital, and without looking at anyone, found her way to the small interfaith chapel on the 2nd floor. She had passed it 100 times and had always looked away. But now her feet moved on their own. She stepped inside and closed the door. It was quiet, simple. A single cross hung on the wall. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't even sure who she was talking to. But her heart broke open. "I don't believe in you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "But if you're real, if you really exist, and if you have the power to heal my son, just give him back to me. And I will serve you all my life." A mother who once spat at the mention of Jesus now stood in front of his symbol. Not in belief, but in brokenness. What happened next would change everything she thought she knew. Before we continue, welcome to Mysterious Uplift, the channel where real life-changing testimonies meet divine encounters. If you're someone searching for truth, hope, or inspiration, consider subscribing. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of these powerful, true stories. And if this story touches your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Now, Let's hear directly from Asha Varma.
Namaste, my name is Asha Varma. I was born and raised in Jabalpur, a city wrapped in tradition, where the morning bells of the temple ring louder than the sound of traffic, and the smell of incense seeps into every home like a silent prayer. My childhood was soaked in faith. My mother taught me how to fold my hands before the idols, how to light the diya without letting it flicker, and how to chant the Gayatri mantra with devotion that could move the gods. Our home had a corner, our mandir, where we offered flowers every morning, just like we brushed our teeth. Skipping it wasn't even an option. God came before breakfast. By the time I was 23, married into the Varma family, my devotion had deepened. Every single day of my life followed a rhythm of prayer, offering, and gratitude. I would wake up before dawn, before even the birds began singing, sweep the floor, take a bath, and wear fresh clothes. I'd tie my hair up, dress in a clean sari, and walk barefoot to the temple on Station Road. That temple, dedicated to Durga Ma, was my sacred space. I knew every crack in its floor, every fading line on the deity's face. I offered coconuts, red cloth, marigold garlands, sometimes even gold bangles during Navratri. I did it not to be seen, not for show, but because it was part of who I was. I didn't just believe in my gods. I trusted them more than I trusted anyone else in the world. Every Tuesday I fasted. Every Saturday, I lit a lamp for Lord Hanuman. On Thursdays, I visited the Sai Baba temple and offered milk. I fed stray cows and dogs. I gave alms to the old beggar who sat near the railway crossing. When I was pregnant with Arav, my only son, I performed special rituals in Varanasi to ask for a healthy child. And when he was born, I whispered mantras into his tiny ears before he could even open his eyes. I kept Arav close to tradition too. I taught him to fold his hands, to bow before idols, to touch elders' feet, to keep fasts during Shivratri. He had a little Dodakurta set I made him wear during pujas, and I would guide his hands to pour water over the shivling every Monday morning. My life revolved around rituals and I clung to them like breath. But there was one thing I couldn't tolerate, and that was the growing influence of Christianity in our neighborhood. To me, it felt like a threat, like a slow erosion of what was pure and Indian. There was a small Pentecostal church that had opened in a rented building just 3 lanes from our home. At first, they kept to themselves, just a few families gathering to sing on Sundays. But over time, I noticed more and more people going there. Women in saris, men with folded hands, even children who used to come to the temple began to disappear. Their singing was different. No bells, no drums, just clapping and some strange foreign words mixed into Hindi. It made my skin crawl. I didn't keep my feelings hidden. I scolded my neighbor Leela once for playing a Christian song too loudly during one of her prayer meetings. "This is India," I told her. "Keep your foreign prayers inside your house. Our children don't need to hear this nonsense." She just smiled at me and said nothing. That irritated me even more. What right did they have to bring their foreign gods into our town, our culture? One day, Arav brought home a small booklet from school. It had a drawing of a man with long hair and a kind face. "Mama, look, Jesus," he said proudly. I snatched it from his hand and tore it in half right there in front of him. "Don't you ever bring this into our home again," I snapped. "Our gods are enough." He looked at me confused, even hurt, but I couldn't help it. I felt like I was protecting something sacred. I didn't want my son growing up confused, swaying between gods like people switching TV channels. That kind of thing only brings destruction to a family. I had always believed that our gods rewarded those who stayed faithful. I thought, no, I knew, that as long as I followed every ritual, observed every fast, and gave every offering, my life would be protected. And until that point, it felt like it was working. We weren't rich, but we had peace. Arav was bright and joyful, and my marriage to Rakesh, though not perfect, had stability. So when everything started to fall apart, I wasn't just afraid. I was confused, deeply confused, because I had done everything right. Every single thing. And still nothing could stop what was coming. I didn't know it then, but my whole understanding of faith was about to be turned inside out. It was a Thursday morning in late September when everything changed. Arav had just turned 9 2 weeks before. He was sitting at the dining table, halfway through his glass of milk, when he suddenly froze, his hands shaking slightly. I thought he was pretending at first. He often made silly faces to make me laugh. But then his glass slipped from his hand and crashed onto the floor. I rushed to him, calling his name, but his eyes had already rolled back, and he collapsed into my arms like a sack of wet cloth. I screamed so loud the neighbors came running. Rakesh was at work and I didn't have time to think. I grabbed Arav barefoot, Sari flying behind me, and rushed out onto the street. A kind rickshaw driver saw me and didn't ask a single question. He drove straight to Sharda Children's Hospital on Nagpur Road. The doctors took him in immediately. They checked his vitals, ran a few emergency tests, and by evening, they said they couldn't find anything abnormal. Might be a case of sudden fatigue, one of them suggested. Monitor him. Let's wait and see. But I knew my son. Arav wasn't just tired. He wasn't the kind of child who faked illness to avoid school. He was full of energy, always laughing, always asking questions about the world. That night in the hospital bed, he lay unusually quiet, eyes half open but blank. His forehead burned with a fever that wouldn't go down. I sat beside him, soaking a towel in cold water, and placing it on his head every few minutes, whispering prayers under my breath. Over the next few days, things got worse. The fever didn't leave. It would subside for an hour, and then rise like a flame. He began losing his appetite. His skin turned pale. He started vomiting, first once a day, then twice, then after every sip of water. We moved him to a bigger hospital in Bhopal, hoping the specialists there could give us answers. They did more tests, blood work, ultrasounds, even a spinal tap. But nothing made sense. It's not bacterial, not viral, not neurological. We don't understand, the doctor told us, looking as helpless as I felt. We went from one hospital to the next like beggars holding out our hands. From Jabalpur to Bhopal, from Bhopal to Indore. Every city brought new doctors, new prescriptions, new bills. We started selling my jewelry. My bangles, my necklace from our wedding, the little gold studs Arav wore as a baby, all gone. But still no diagnosis. One doctor hinted at a rare autoimmune issue. Another suggested a psychological root. But none of them were sure, and none of their treatments worked. His condition only worsened. By the second month, Arav could barely sit up. He spoke in whispers. His legs shook when he tried to walk, and one night as I helped him to the bathroom he had a seizure. His small body jerking violently as I screamed for help. Rakesh ran in and held him while I cried like a child. We had no idea what we were witnessing. When medicine failed, I turned to what I had always trusted, faith. I went to every temple I could find. I walked the full 11 kilometers to the Shitla Mata Mandir barefoot. I gave offerings, fruits, milk, coins, clothes. I slept on the temple floor for 3 nights straight during Navratri, refusing food and water, hoping the goddess would take pity. I even went to a sadhu living on the outskirts of town, a man rumored to perform healing rituals. He gave me ash to mix in Arav's water, and told me to recite a special mantra 108 times daily. I followed it like my life depended on it because it did. But nothing worked. We invited 3 pundits to our home for a havan. The house filled with smoke and the sound of chanting, but Arav lay unmoved in his bed, the same fever pulsing through his veins. A visiting astrologer from Ujjain told me our family was cursed, that one of our ancestors had angered a goddess. He gave us a list of ceremonies to perform and insisted I sacrifice a black goat at a temple in Rajasthan. We did it. Every bit of it. Still, my son's body kept shrinking, his eyes dulling. His hair began to fall. His laughter had disappeared. And in its place there was only silence. Rakesh and I began fighting more. He blamed me for wasting money on rituals and superstitions. I blamed him for not believing hard enough. He started sleeping in the other room. My in-laws began suggesting other explanations. Maybe someone put black magic on him, my mother-in-law whispered. That Christian made you fired last year. Maybe she cursed the child. I didn't know what to believe anymore. What terrified me the most wasn't just that Arav was dying. It was that everything I had ever leaned on, faith, rituals, tradition, seemed to be collapsing around me. I felt like I was screaming into the wind. My gods, the very ones I had loved since childhood, now stood silent in the face of my grief. I had done everything they asked. And still, I was losing my only child. Every night, I lay beside him, holding his tiny hand that once felt so full of life, now cold and weak. I would whisper, "Just give me a sign you'll be okay," but he never answered. And in those long, empty nights, a terrifying thought began creeping into my heart. What if nothing I believed in was true? I reached a point where I no longer recognized myself. Every day felt like dragging a stone through my chest. Arv's body was failing in front of me, and I had run out of things to give. But somehow, I kept searching for one more offering, one more chant, one more God to beg. One evening, just before sunset, I found myself standing in front of the idol of Ma Durga at the temple on Station Road. I'd been there thousands of times, but that day, something inside me cracked. I didn't fold my hands or close my eyes like I always had. I stood in front of her statue, shaking, the weight of months of unanswered prayers bearing down on my shoulders. And then I screamed. I shouted like a madwoman. I cried in a way I didn't know was possible, loud, guttural, bitter. "Why?" I screamed. "Why are you quiet? Haven't I given enough? Haven't I worshipped you my entire life?" The priest turned to look at me, and a few people around moved away, as if my pain was something contagious. I didn't care. I tore the bangles off my arms and threw them at the idol. I ripped the gold chain from my neck, the last thing I had left, and laid it on the cold marble floor. Then I did something I had never done, not even when my father died. I untied my hair, pulled out the safety pins, and in front of the temple doors, I cut it all off with a small knife from my handbag. I had heard of women in old times doing this in mourning, but this wasn't mourning. This was war. I gave my hair to the goddess like a final bargain. "Take this too," I said. "Take all of me. But give me back my son." I came home that night a shadow of myself. My hair uneven, my neck bare, my eyes swollen. I looked into the mirror and hardly recognized the woman staring back. I collapsed onto the floor near Arv's bed and wept until morning. The next day I stopped eating. First I told everyone it was fast. But it wasn't. It was something deeper. I felt like nothing mattered anymore. Food had no taste, sleep didn't come, and prayer had become a ritual of silence. Arv lay in bed with his breathing now shallow and inconsistent, and I sat beside him like a statue, barely moving. Rakesh couldn't handle it anymore. His frustration turned into anger. He stormed into the room one afternoon and shouted at me in front of Arv. "You've wasted everything," he said. "All this money, all this time. On what? Some charlatans in saffron robes? All your gods, your ceremonies, your ash and mantras, where are they now?" He pointed at Arv's frail body and added, "You've believed more in rituals than medicine. You pushed me away when I wanted real help." I didn't fight back. I didn't have the strength. I just looked at Arv's face and stayed quiet. I knew he was hurting too, in his own way, watching his son wither, while his wife clung to chants and powders. But what he didn't understand was that faith had been all I ever had. I wasn't chasing superstition. I was holding on to the only thing I knew. But the people outside our walls had their own version of the story. Word spread fast in our neighborhood. People whispered when I passed by. "It must be black magic," someone said loudly enough for me to hear. "She probably offended someone. Maybe it's a curse. Maybe she brought it on herself." Even old Aunt Kamla, who had once borrowed money from me during a family emergency, now crossed the street when she saw me. One woman told my sister-in-law that a Christian pastor had cursed our home because I'd insulted some believers the year before. It felt like the walls were closing in. I was grieving for a child who hadn't died but was fading. I was grieving for a faith that no longer answered me. And worst of all, I was grieving in public, under the scrutiny of 100 watching eyes who judged my every move. And yet, even in all that fury and shame, I still clung to the hope that something would change. That some God somewhere would finally show up. But each day that passed, I watched my son slip further and further away, and I realized I was no longer just angry at the gods. I was starting to feel something far more dangerous. I was starting to lose faith in everything. It was during our third hospital admission, this time in a private clinic near Civil Lines in Jabalpur, that I met her. The place was smaller than the others we had tried, but the doctors had a good reputation, and we were willing to try anything at that point. Arv had grown thinner than I ever thought possible. His bones poked through his skin. His voice, once full of questions and laughter, was now barely above a whisper. I was sitting beside his bed, gently rubbing his feet like I always did to keep his blood flowing. I hadn't eaten in over 2 days. My body ached from sleeping in chairs and corridors. My lips had started to crack from dehydration, but I didn't care anymore. Nothing mattered except keeping my son alive. That's when the nurse walked in. She was in her early 30s, maybe younger, with calm eyes and a soft way of speaking. Her name tag read Nurse Miriam. I had seen her before but never paid attention. That day, as she checked Ariv's vitals and changed his 4-drip, she paused and looked at me. She didn't say much. Just a gentle suggestion. "Mom, I know you're in pain. I don't mean to offend you, but would it be okay if I say a small prayer for your son? Not out loud. Just in my heart." I looked at her like she had just cursed in front of me. I felt heat rise in my face. Prayer? From her? I shot up from my chair and pointed at the door. "Get out," I snapped. "Take your Christian nonsense elsewhere. My son doesn't need your foreign god." She stood frozen for a moment, surprised but not angry. I could see she wasn't trying to hurt me. She just nodded quietly, adjusted the blanket over Ariv, and walked out. I went straight to the front desk and demanded that another nurse be assigned. "If she comes into my son's room again, I will go to the media," I threatened. "We don't need her kind here." They agreed to assign someone else. But that didn't ease the fire in my chest. I was furious, not at her specifically, but at the audacity. That even now, when I was giving everything to my gods, someone thought their Jesus could do what mine couldn't. It felt like an insult to my whole life. That night something changed. Ariv had been quiet the whole evening. Around 1:30 a.m., I noticed his breathing had changed. It became shallow, labored, almost like a man drowning in slow motion. I pressed the emergency button. The doctors rushed in. The new nurse checked the monitor and ran out to call the pediatrician on call. There was a flurry of activity, but no one said anything directly to me. I sat on the cold floor, hugging my knees to my chest, watching from the corner like a guest in my own nightmare. After some time, the doctor approached, gently kneeling beside me. "Mrs. Varma," he said, not meeting my eyes. "His body is giving up. We're doing everything we can, but you should prepare yourself. Tonight could be critical." I didn't cry. I just sat there frozen. Something inside me had broken too deeply to respond. My hands were trembling, and for the first time, I felt afraid in a way I never had before. It wasn't the fear of losing him. I'd felt that for weeks. It was the fear that I had finally reached the end of faith, the end of hope, the end of all things. The machines beeped quietly behind me. The hallway outside was silent. My husband had gone home to bathe and bring food, but I didn't even have the strength to call him. And then something happened that I still cannot explain, not fully. As I stared at the floor, a strange image flashed across my mind, not like a dream, and not like a thought. I saw Ariv, standing, not lying in bed, not pale. He was standing in a bright field, with sunlight falling on his face. He looked strong again, and he was smiling, not at me, but at someone I couldn't see. I blinked. I shook my head. It lasted only a moment. I didn't understand what it meant. But what followed was even more unexpected. I felt a strange urge, one I didn't want to admit. A voice deep inside, not loud, not even in words, but more like a pull. A whisper inside my own heart. What if? What if she was right? What if there was a power I had never dared to accept? Not a rejection of what I believed before, but something I had never opened my heart to? I felt ashamed just thinking about it, but I also knew I had no more cards to play. For the first time in my life, I began to question the line I had drawn so firmly for so many years. I had always thought my gods would rescue me, but now I stood at the edge of the cliff with no answers and no one left to call. In that silence, in that empty hospital room with blinking machines and stale air, I whispered, not out loud, not even intentionally, just deep in my soul, "If you're real, if you're really there, show me." The hallway outside the ICU was silent except for the beeping machines and the occasional hurried footsteps of a nurse. My husband was sitting slumped on a bench with his head in his hands, silent for the first time in days. I couldn't feel my legs anymore. I'd been standing for hours. My sari clung to my skin, damp with sweat and tears. There was nowhere else to turn. The doctors had just told me to prepare for the worst. I didn't need to ask what that meant. I could see it in their eyes, they had already given up. I remember walking down the corridor without knowing where I was going. I wasn't thinking anymore. I had cried every tear, screamed every scream. My voice was hoarse, and my body ached in places I didn't know could ache. Somewhere near the far end of the hospital wing, I saw a door slightly ajar. The sign above it read Chapel. I hesitated. I had passed by that room many times before, always with judgment in my heart. I'd even scolded a nurse once for inviting me to pray there. That same nurse had smiled and told me, "Jesus can do what no one else can." I had spat her words back at her, and demanded she leave my son's room. But now, I stood at the threshold of the chapel. There was no priest, no people. Just dim lights, wooden benches, and at the far end, a plain cross mounted on the wall. No gold, no flowers, no smoke from incense. Just silence. It was unfamiliar. Almost too simple. My feet moved on their own. I stepped inside like a thief sneaking into forbidden territory. I didn't belong there. And yet, that night, I had nowhere else to go. I sat in the last row, hunched forward, my fingers trembling. I looked at the cross and whispered bitterly, "You, if you are even there. I don't know you. I don't believe in you." My throat tightened. "I hate everything you represent. I have hated the people who follow you." A sob caught in my chest. But none of that matters right now. I buried my face in my palms. I am a mother. That's all I am now. And I am about to lose my only child. Minutes passed. Or maybe it was just seconds. Then in a trembling voice I raised my head, looked at the cross again and said slowly, "Jesus, if you are God, then heal my son." My voice cracked, but I pushed through. "I don't care where you're from. I don't care who says what. Just heal him." I looked down at my lap, clenching my hands together. "If you do, I will serve you. Forever. I swear it. Just show me you're real. Heal my child, my only child, please." I didn't light any candle. I didn't know any Christian prayer. I didn't know if he was listening. But I spoke from a place deeper than I had ever reached before. It wasn't religion anymore. It was desperation. It was the cry of a mother with nothing left to offer. I sat there in silence. No flashes of light.
No thunder.
No wind. Just silence. But something in me shifted. Not peace, not yet. But a crack opened in the wall I had built my whole life. And through that crack, for the first time, I let him in. I didn't tell anyone about the prayer. Not even my husband. I returned to the ICU that night and sat beside my son's bed like always, holding his tiny hand, feeling the fever burning through his body. Machines beeped steadily, but the look on the doctors' faces earlier had said it all. Hope was slipping through our fingers. I stayed by his side, whispering nothing, thinking of nothing. My eyes were swollen from crying. My spirit was hollow. I didn't know what I expected from that chapel. Maybe nothing. But in the corner of my soul, I had placed a fragile hope. One last hope in a God I didn't understand. Around 3 a.m., a nurse came in to check his vitals. She paused. Her eyes narrowed. Then she checked again. "That's strange," she murmured. I sat up, heart racing. What is it?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. She just went to get the attending doctor. 2 doctors and a technician entered, speaking in low tones. They surrounded my son's bed, checking monitors, his breathing, his heartbeat, his temperature. I sat frozen in the corner, afraid to speak, afraid to hope. And then one of them turned to me and said the words I never expected to hear. "His fever has broken. His lungs are clearing. His oxygen levels are stabilizing." I blinked. What does that mean? The doctor looked baffled. "It means he's improving. Significantly. Rapidly. But we don't know how." It felt like time stopped. "Wait, but you said there was no hope. You said." My voice cracked. "I know what we said," the doctor replied quietly. "But this is something else. We were sure we were losing him." I couldn't speak. I just stared at my son, who moments ago had been at death's door. Now his chest rose and fell in a calm rhythm. His brow was dry. His lips were pink again. The terror that had gripped me for days began to loosen, replaced by something unfamiliar and overwhelming. I stood slowly. My knees trembled. I backed out of the room without thinking and ran down the hallway. Back to the chapel. Back to that small, quiet place. And there, in front of the same cross where I had made my desperate plea, I fell to my knees. No one was watching. There were no lights, no choirs, no visions. Just me and him. I wept. Deep, shaking sobs burst from me, not of grief, but of awe, of something breaking and healing all at once. You heard me. I whispered through tears. You heard me, and you answered. I didn't understand it. I didn't know what to do next. But I knew one thing with complete certainty. He was real. And he had come for me, not with thunder or force, but with mercy. I didn't sleep the night after my son's turnaround. How could I? My body was tired, but my heart was wide awake. Something had shifted, permanently. A wall had come down inside of me. And even though I couldn't yet explain what had happened, I knew I had crossed a line I could never uncross. A few days later, when my son was moved out of ICU, I slipped away for an hour and walked, slowly, nervously, to a nearby church. Not a mosque. Not a shrine. A church. I didn't know what I expected to find there. I felt like I didn't belong. But I needed to be in a place that honored the name of the one who answered me when I called. I sat at the back, head down, scarf tight, heart racing. The sanctuary was quiet, filled with soft music and the gentle hum of people praying. It felt different from anything I had ever known, peaceful, yes, but also alive. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her. The Christian nurse. The one I had yelled at, insulted, demanded be removed. She was lighting a candle at the front, whispering a prayer. I almost didn't want to disturb her, but I felt a pull, like I had to go. I hesitated, then quietly walked up to her. She turned surprised but then smiled warmly. I stood there, awkward, almost ashamed.
I'm sorry, he whispered.
She reached out and touched my arm. God hears us, even in our anger. I looked down. You said I should pray, and I did. And he answered. Tears welled up in her eyes. Jesus loves you. More than you know. I swallowed hard. I want to know him. I don't know how, but I want to. She didn't pressure me. She just nodded, reached into her purse and handed me a small Bible. Start here, she said. Start in the book of John. Just read. Ask him to show you. That night I held that Bible like it was gold. I sat in the hospital waiting room and opened it, slowly flipping through the pages. I whispered, Jesus, help me know you. Please show me who you really are. Every word felt like light pouring into a dark place. I didn't understand everything, but there was a strange beauty in the words. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But then came the storm. My husband noticed the Bible. His face twisted in disbelief. What is this? He demanded. I'm just reading. That's all. I said quickly. That's all? That's all. He shouted. This is betrayal. You are playing with fire. Our families will disown us. Do you want shame? Do you want disgrace? I tried to explain, to reason with him. I told him what happened in the chapel. I told him about our son. I told him I wasn't abandoning anything. I was simply trying to understand the God who answered my cry. But he wasn't moved. His anger grew hotter by the day. One night he stood over me, trembling with rage, and said, If you ever think of getting baptized, I will leave you. Do you hear me? I'll take our children. I'll cut you off. His words hit like a knife to my chest. I felt torn, caught between the faith awakening inside me and the family I loved. But even in the fear there was peace. A quiet, deep assurance. I had tasted truth. I couldn't unknow it now. Jesus wasn't a religion. He wasn't a symbol. He was real. He had come for me when no one else could. And somehow I knew he would walk with me through whatever came next. The days that followed were a storm of silence and tension at home. My husband barely looked at me. His warnings echoed in my head day and night. But something had changed deep within me, something irreversible. I had touched the truth and it had touched me back. I couldn't walk away now, not even if it cost me everything. One night, I sat alone in the living room after everyone had gone to bed. The small Bible lay open in my lap. My eyes rested on Jesus' words in the book of Matthew. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. I knew what it meant. I understood the cost. But I also knew this. I had already found life. I wasn't willing to lose it again. A few weeks later, I met the nurse again. This time not by accident but by arrangement. We sat in the back of a quiet cafe, and I told her I was ready. "Are you sure?" she asked gently. I nodded, tears already streaming down my cheeks. I made a promise to the living God. I will not go back. And so, in a hidden place, surrounded by a few believers I had never met before, I stood in the water. My heart was pounding. My hands trembled. But my soul was steady. As the pastor spoke the words, "Buried with Christ in death, raised to walk in new life," I felt the water close over me. It was only a few seconds, but it felt like I passed through a veil. When I came up out of the water, I gasped, not for breath, but from the overwhelming presence of peace that flooded me. I felt like I was being held, wrapped in something holy. I wept freely, openly. This was more than a ritual. It was a declaration. I had chosen Jesus. Over my reputation. Over fear. Over culture. Over even my marriage. I was his. That same week, my son was discharged from the hospital. He was healthy, completely healed. Even the doctors were amazed by his recovery. They said it was unusual, that it didn't follow the expected medical trajectory. But I knew. Oh, I knew. It was a miracle. A sign. A whisper from heaven that I wasn't walking alone. At home things were still hard. My husband kept his distance. He didn't leave, but the coldness between us was like ice. He didn't understand this fire inside me. But he saw something, that I was no longer afraid. That I had a quiet joy he couldn't shake. And slowly his anger began to turn into confusion. Then silence, and eventually tolerance. I didn't push. I didn't preach. I simply lived. And then other women began asking me questions. Quietly. Cautiously. "What happened to your son? You look different." I started meeting with a small group of women, just a few at first, then more. Some were nurses. Others were mothers I'd met in the hospital. Some wore hijabs. Others didn't. All were hungry for something real. I didn't come as a preacher. I came as a witness. I told them my story. How Jesus found me in a hospital chapel when I was out of options. How he didn't wait for me to be perfect or Christian or ready. How he came into my pain, my doubt, my fear, and loved me anyway. We met in living rooms, in parking lots, even in empty stairwells of the hospital. And somehow, a quiet movement began. A ripple of light in dark places. And I knew this was just the beginning.
She once mocked the name of Jesus. She laughed at those who followed him, called them weak, deluded, lost. But when her world collapsed, when every door slammed shut, and even her family turned their backs, it wasn't the God of her upbringing who answered her cry. It was Jesus. When she whispered a desperate prayer in a hospital chapel, it was Jesus who came. When her son's life hung by a thread, it was Jesus who moved. When she stood trembling in the waters of baptism, it was Jesus who held her. He didn't ask for perfection. He didn't demand a ritual. He just loved her. In the rawest, realest moment of her life, he showed up. Maybe you're watching this and you don't believe it. Maybe you've laughed at faith. Maybe you've been hurt by religion. Or maybe you're just tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of pain. Tired of carrying it all on your own. Listen carefully. You may not believe in him, but he still believes in you. You may not see him yet, but he sees you, right now. In your loneliness, in your questions, in your secret battles. He's not waiting for you to clean yourself up. He's not waiting for you to become religious. He's simply waiting for you to whisper, "Jesus, if you're real, come." If you need healing, if you need comfort, if you're searching for truth, and nothing else has satisfied, then take a moment, right now. Close your eyes and talk to him. Just be honest. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video. Drop a comment, we read everyone. Subscribe to Mysterious Uplift for more real-life stories of courage, faith, and redemption. Share this story. Someone you know might be just one challenge away from a miracle. This isn't just a testimony. It's an invitation. Because if Jesus could find her in a hospital chapel, he can find you too wherever you are.